My name is Jason Vong, and this is everything you need to know about getting super sharp photos with any cameras. Now, there are 3 potential reasons why your photos are not coming out sharp. 1. Blur due to some kind of motion. 2. Misfocus due to poor setup. And 3. Grainy, ugly noise due to your ISO being too damn high. If you've seen a similar video from me in the past, hey, welcome back. It's been years. How you doing? We have updated samples, including some new, handy visuals to help anyone get super sharp results.
Reason number 1. Blur due to some kind of motion.
Now, in order to understand why you're constantly getting blurry photos, we first need to talk about shutter speed.
3, 2, 1.
Shutter speed is basically how long it takes for the camera to take the shot. You'll often hear fast shutter speed and slow shutter speed, and using a slower than necessary shutter speed will be the cause of blurry photos. But what's considered fast and what's considered slow? Shutter speed is measured by 1 second, so this number here is a fraction of that 1 second. 1/8,000 is considered super fast. 1/800 is considered fast, 1/80 is considered normal, 1/8 is considered slow, and 8 is considered super slow because then it's literally 8 seconds for your camera to spit you back out an image. Let's jump into an in-camera demo.
And I better hurry.
Watch as we're dialing the shutter speed to the left here. As you can see, there's a lot more blur happening as we go down in number, to the point where I'm becoming a blurry ghost. Taking a photo here will result in a blurry photo. Now, the reason why the image gets brighter as we slow the shutter speed down is because there is more time for the light to enter the sensor. More light, more bright. Vice versa, as we dial it to the right, not only does it get darker, but there's also less and less blur to the point where you can pause the frame at any second and see that I'm frozen in action. And that's the thing you need to keep in mind when you want a sharp photo. So now that you understand the difference between a slow shutter speed and fast shutter speed, let's talk about how to choose the most optimal shutter speed setting to get the best result. Because you definitely don't need to be shooting at 1/8000 for every photo.
Photographing static subjects.
Taking a photo of landscape, cityscape, products, or still portraitures is relatively easy.
That's me.
Just follow this general rule of thumb for handheld photography. General thumb?
Just stop it.
If you're using a camera and a lens without any built-in image stabilization, for full-frame users, shoot at your focal length. If you're using a 50mm lens, then your shutter speed should be at least 1/50. APS-C users, double your focal length. If you're using a 50mm, then your shutter speed should be at least 1/100. If you have image stabilization on either the body or the lens, then you can go under this recommendation here. If you're using a zoom lens, set your shutter speed to match or double your maximum focal length so you don't have to keep constantly changing it every time you zoom in and out. Now, this is just a baseline recommendation. We're gonna be building on top of this.
Photographing moving subjects.
That looks really good. More often than not, it's the moving subjects that are giving beginners a hard time, thus resulting in many blurry photos. For a lot of you out there, you're doing kids or pet photography, some of the more challenging photographic genre, in my Vong opinion. And like raising kids or pets, it takes quite a bit of trial and error. For our demo here, we have our lovely cat model, Milton. Everybody say hi to Milton.
Hi, Milton.
And the setup we'll be using will be a full frame camera with a 50mm lens. So here's us using a slow shutter speed. Not so good as little Milton here is walking quite briskly. Here's an example of me using the recommended shutter speed that we talked about earlier. Got a few good ones, but the few that are in between are blurry. And finally, here's me pushing past the recommended shutter speed just by a tiny bit, and voila, I'm finally getting crystal clear results consistently. Now, the following is not a strict rule, but a good enough general baseline if you're new to photography. Try 1/125 for still subjects like portraits, 1/250 for moving portraits, 1/500 for animals or kid sports, and 1/1000 or more for pro sports or wildlife.
Reason number 2. Misfocus due to poor setup. Wow, that's kind of mean.
No. I don't mean it's because they're not using an expensive professional camera. What I meant is that they're not using the most optimal focus settings.
Whatever you say.
But this has happened to you before, right? You've used the optimal shutter speed, the camera gave you the green light that it got focused, but somehow the photo still came out not sharp. That's likely because we're using a very wide open aperture with a razor thin depth of field. Okay, couple of big terms here, so let's break it down. Going back into the camera, lowering the f-stop to the smallest number on your lens will yield a thin or shallow depth of field. This creates that beautiful background blur, what we call bokeh. If we look at our lens, using the smallest f-stop opens up more light to come in. On the other hand, when we increase our f-stop to a larger number, it closes down the aperture to a smaller hole, therefore less light comes in, but it produces greater or deeper depth of field, so more things will be in focus. But when we hear those phrases, shallow depth of field, deeper depth of field, like what does that even mean? What does that even look like? It took me years to understand this, but don't worry, it will click with you in just a couple of minutes. You see, it's hard to conceptualize depth when we're only seeing what's in front of us, but it'll be much easier when we start to see things from a 2D top-down perspective. This thin line right here represents f1.8, which is quite fitting because you get a shallow depth of field. Even with the slightest movement from you or your subject could cause misfocus in your photo, despite your camera telling you that it locked focus. Versus this thick line right here that represents f8, you have a deeper depth of field. So even if you or your subject move back and forth a bit, there's a much lower chance for you to misfocus because that depth of field is so great. So when you're shooting with a wide open aperture like f1.8, my advice to you is either stay as still as possible or switch to autofocus continuous mode. That way the camera keeps reacquiring focus. Raise the shutter speed a bit more and use burst mode. That way you can be ready and bam bam, land a photo with the focus of your subject tack sharp.
Reason number 3, not being ultra specific with your focus area.
Using too general a focus area is going to be the biggest reason why that one part of your image that you need to be in focus is not in focus. By default, most cameras straight out of the box will be set to shoot with the widest focus area. When you're shooting with a wide focus area, all your focus points are activated. The camera will not be sure where or what exactly that it needs to focus on, and it will just grab focus on whatever's the closest to it. This is where you will need to take an extra few seconds to choose a smaller focus point and position it to where it needs to be for your camera to focus accurately. Depending on your subject and how far away it is, narrowing it down to the smallest focus point will ensure that you achieve pinpoint focus. For example, here we are shooting the beautiful Yosemite landscape, but the wide focus mode is picking up the branch instead of half dome. So we're gonna choose a smaller focus point and position it on the mountain. Wow, such a small adjustment, but it made a huge difference when we punch in. And for those of you with a camera that does not have continuous eye autofocus tracking and you're shooting portraits, simply use the smallest focus point possible and place it right on your subject's eye. This will avoid the issue where the camera might accidentally focus on their nose or random strand of hair. A good habit to develop is simply review your photos on the spot and confirm you nailed focus.
I love it.
Typically, when you enlarge the photo in playback on modern cameras, it will zoom into where it acquired focus. If you didn't nail focus, simply take the photo again. Trust me, this will save you a lot of heartaches. You can't go wrong with Jason Vong.
We still got a couple of hot tips, bonus tips, and a full rundown how we calculate our settings to get super sharp photos with any cameras. But first, I want to share with you an incredible resource for going pro in photography. Professional Photographers of America have over 900 online classes, from the basics of photography to running a business to marketing yourself to clients and much more. On top of that, the moment you become a member, you get $15,000 worth of gear insurance. That means you get full replacement coverage with a flat $350 deductible, or you can repair your equipment with a flat $50 deductible. I know you, Michael, you got some serious case of butterfingers. They also offer data loss, negligence, and malpractice protection with PPA's indemnification trusts. I mean, those two benefits alone will give you the peace of mind when you're out on the job. To learn more, check out the link in the description box below, which you can also use to save $25 off when you sign up. Thank you for sponsoring us, PPA. Now back to the video.
Reason number 4, grainy, ugly noise because your ISO is too damn high.
Watch your ISO setting, folks, especially if you're gonna be using auto ISO. Now, high ISO can be the cause of the grain and mush that we see in our photos, which can be why our images are not coming out sharp. Raising the ISO digitally brightens the image that we're about to take. However, pushing this too hard in a dimly lit situation could yield mushy results. Unlike shutter speed and aperture, moving the ISO to the left to a lower number darkens our image, whereas moving it to the right brightens it. ISO is generally used to compensate for the lack of light to achieve proper exposure in our shots. Now, the following is not always true, but it's a good starting point for beginners. If you're photographing during daytime or in an area with lots of light, keep your ISO between 100 to 800. Of course, the lower the better. If it's nighttime or low light, keep it between 800 to 3200 if you're using an APS-C camera, and 800 to 6400 if you're using a full frame camera. Of course, newer cameras can push past these suggested limits, so I would advise playing around to see which of the high ISO that you're comfortable shooting with. For example, I'm comfortable going up to 12,800 on any modern full frame cameras and 6400 on modern APS-C cameras. And if your camera has this feature, you can actually set the ISO limit to not exceed a certain point when you're shooting with auto ISO. Hey, I shoot with auto ISO all the time, and there's no shame in that, because now we know how to get out of it to get the best results possible. But in the event that you end up with a really grainy photo, there's a pretty good chance that you can still salvage it with modern photo editing apps. For those of you who are using Adobe Lightroom, there's a pretty good denoise feature that will clean that right up.
Bonus tips.
Now, I want to share with you some bonus tips right before we walk you through a real-world step-by-step example on how we adjust all of our settings on one go to get super sharp shots. While all the tips that we shared applies to all cameras, what would also help is simply getting closer to your subject.
And then I'm gonna come a little closer.
When your main subject of interest is further away, it's hard to perceive the sharpness, but by getting closer, wow, what a staggering difference. Eye-piercing sharpness. Now, owning a telephoto lens can also make a huge difference as well. If you're using a full-frame camera, an 85mm is highly recommended for portraits, and you're guaranteed to see super sharp results immediately. For you APS-C users, that's 56mm. For an affordable 85mm prime for different camera brands, I will include links in the pinned comment and description box below. Just make sure the one that you're getting is compatible with your camera.
Putting it all together.
So let's put it into practice. Here's the step-by-step on how we adjust all the settings on one go to get super sharp photos. Start by putting your camera into manual mode. Set your aperture value first, then apply the shutter speed rule, and adjust it if necessary. Begin at ISO 100 and increase it only if needed. If your image is looking too bright, dial down the ISO. If you can't lower the ISO anymore, go ahead and raise the shutter speed until you achieve the proper exposure. Remember, moving the shutter speed to the right will also darken your image. And finally, make sure you're using the correct focus point and take your shot. Boom! Easy! If you guys found this video helpful, do me a favor and drop me a super thanks. Don't forget to check out PPA, link down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!